She seems perfect, charming, intelligent, deeply empathetic. She listens to your problems with genuine concern, offers thoughtful advice, and makes you feel understood in ways you've never experienced before. She seems like the missing piece you didn't even know you were searching for. Friends and family admire her. They tell you how lucky you are, how she's everything you ever wanted in a partner. But fast forward 6 months, and the picture has changed. You're sitting in your car outside your own apartment, staring at the door, too afraid to go inside. Your hands tremble as you grip the steering wheel, replaying arguments you can't fully remember, wondering whether you actually said the things she claims you did. You begin questioning your own memory, your own judgment, even your sanity. You live under a constant cloud of guilt. Guilt for mistakes you can't recall making. Guilt for words you can't remember saying. Guilt for emotions that don't even feel like they belong to you. You walk on eggshells, terrified of triggering another storm. Every step feels like an emotional landmine, waiting to explode under the pressure of her shifting moods. You no longer recognize yourself. You've become a stranger in your own life, hollowed out, drained, and confused. What happened? You've encountered what psychologists call the shadow, the unconscious darkness that some people carry like an invisible virus, infecting everyone around them with their unresolved psychological toxicity. These women are not obviously dangerous. They don't announce themselves with flashing red lights or neon warning signs. They operate in the shadows, beneath conscious awareness, using weapons you can't see to fight battles you didn't know you were in. This is what makes them so destructive. The most dangerous predators are not the ones who roar and snarl openly, but the ones who slip quietly into your life disguised as healers, saviors, or soulmates. The most damaging women you'll ever meet won't necessarily scream, hit, or openly abuse you. They will appear caring, sensitive, and deeply emotional while slowly, systematically transferring their inner chaos into your mind. They convince you that you're helping them heal, while in reality, they are making you sick. This transfer of toxicity doesn't happen through obvious abuse, it happens through mechanisms you can't easily detect. It hides behind the illusion of intimacy. At first, it feels like deep connection. She shares her fears, her wounds, her traumas. She reveals secrets no one else knows. You feel honored to be trusted with her pain. You believe you're building a profound bond. But in truth, it's not connection. It's a transaction. She is downloading for relief, handing off the weight of her unresolved emotions onto you. Each story, each tear, each confession shifts her burden onto your shoulders. Slowly, you start carrying her anxiety, absorbing her depression, organizing your life around her triggers, and managing her instability as if it were your responsibility. Her inner chaos becomes your external reality. The most insidious part of this process is that it makes you complicit in your own psychological colonization. You think you're being supportive. You believe you're helping her heal. But in truth, you're enabling her to avoid responsibility for her own growth. You become addicted to the feeling of being needed, while she becomes dependent on being rescued. It's a toxic dance, one that drains you while keeping her exactly where she's always been, broken, unstable, and unaccountable. At the heart of this manipulation lies projection. Projection is the unconscious mechanism where a person takes the qualities they can't acknowledge in themselves and dumps them onto someone else. Then, they treat that person as if they are guilty of possessing those very qualities. With psychologically dangerous women, projection creates an invisible matrix of distortion. You are no longer interacting with reality. You are interacting with her distorted perception of you. When she accuses you of being selfish, it's her own selfishness she cannot face. When she calls you emotionally unavailable, she is projecting her own walls. When she insists you are controlling, she is masking her own controlling nature. The result? Authentic communication becomes impossible. You are never talking about real issues. You're trapped defending yourself against accusations that don't match your reality. Every conversation becomes a trial, and you're always the defendant. Over time, this constant defense erodes your sense of self. You begin doubting your own perceptions, questioning your own character, even accepting responsibility for problems that are not yours to carry. You become guilty not because you are guilty, but because you've been gaslighted into believing guilt is your default state. And here's the cruelest twist. Your attempts to defend yourself only reinforce her distorted view. If you raise your voice in frustration, she declares you have anger issues. If you grow exhausted from constant accusations, she calls you emotionally withdrawn. Your resistance becomes proof of your supposed flaws. This is the prison of projection. The more you fight, the deeper you sink. The most advanced form of this manipulation is the victim mask. These women learn to weaponize vulnerability, presenting themselves as perpetual victims of life, love, and circumstance. They tell stories of trauma and betrayal, painting themselves as fragile souls who only want to be loved. Their suffering seems so raw, so convincing, that it awakens your protective instincts. You want to rescue them, shield them, prove that not everyone will hurt them. But behind this victimhood is a predator. Victimhood becomes a tool of control. Every time you try to set a boundary, she frames it as cruelty. Every time you express a need, she reframes it as neglect. Every time you try to detach, she reminds you of how much she's suffered, pulling you back into her web of pity and guilt. And here lies the brutal truth. These women are not seeking healing. They are seeking hosts. They don't want to face their pain, so they make you carry it. They don't want to wrestle with their shadow, so they project it onto you. They don't want to take responsibility for their healing, so they convince you that your love, your patience, your sacrifice will fix them. But it never does. Because the truth is, no amount of love can heal someone who refuses to take responsibility for themselves. And no amount of sacrifice can save you from the slow erosion of your own soul. This is why recognizing these patterns is not just important, it is survival. Because once you see the shadow, you can no longer unsee it. Once you recognize projection, you stop mistaking it for truth. Once you identify the victim mask, you stop being manipulated by it. The reality is sobering. The most dangerous women in your life will rarely look dangerous. They will look like angels, like saviors, like soulmates. But their power lies in this very disguise. They make you believe you're safe while they slowly dismantle your mind from the inside. And the only defense, the only way out is not to love harder, not to sacrifice more, not to rescue deeper. It is to see clearly, to separate compassion from self-destruction, to recognize that carrying someone else's shadow will only bury your own light. Because in the end, survival comes not from saving air but from saving yourself. Your natural masculine impulse to provide security becomes the hook that keeps you trapped in her psychological web. This instinct is not weakness, it's an ancient drive wired into men over millennia, a deep urge to protect, provide, and shield. But when directed toward the wrong woman, that noble instinct becomes your downfall. The victim presentation she embodies is not an expression of authentic fragility, but a tactical maneuver designed to manipulate your protector's reflex. While she may have experienced real trauma, she has weaponized that trauma into a shield against accountability. The moment you raise a concern, you're cast as cruel. Every criticism transforms into persecution. Every boundary becomes abandonment. Every request for accountability becomes yet another proof that you're just like everyone else who's hurt her. By twisting her wounds into weapons, she creates a system where she cannot lose and you cannot win. The transformation, the flip, happens gradually. At first, she is fragile, leaning on your strength, praising you for your support. But the deeper you invest, the more the dynamic changes. The fragile woman who seemed in need of rescue reveals herself to be a master of psychological warfare. The victim morphs into the prosecutor. The wounded turns into the warrior. The helpless becomes the handler. And suddenly, the same person you've been trying to save is standing across from you, accusing you, condemning you, and treating you as if you are the very monster you swore to protect her from. This flip is profoundly disorienting. It contradicts everything you thought you knew about her and about your own role in the relationship. The protector becomes the accused. the savior becomes the suspect. And in this confusion, she gains her strongest weapon, your disbelief. You can't reconcile the person you loved with the person attacking you, so you keep doubting your own perception, holding on to the hope that the real her is the fragile woman you first met. That hope becomes your prison. Some women operate not just as manipulators, but as emotional parasites, feeding off the psychological energy of others while offering nothing in return. These women don't want true partnership. They want hosts. To them, love isn't about shared growth or mutual support, it's about sustaining their dysfunction by siphoning off your energy. The emotional parasite positions herself as a tragic figure. She talks about her broken childhood, her betrayals, her lost dreams, her endless struggles. She presents herself as someone who would be extraordinary if only she could finally heal. And in that, if only, you find your mission. You believe that your love, your support, your dedication will unlock her potential. You see yourself as the knight who will finally heal the wounded maiden. But what you don't realize is that her wounds are not meant to be healed. Healing would end the parasitic bond she relies on. So she clings to her dysfunction, not as a problem to solve, but as the very fuel that keeps her dynamic alive. The cruel irony is that your efforts to rescue her only deepen her dependence. Every time you save her from consequences, you rob her of growth. Every time you manage her emotions, you weaken your own reserves. You don't strengthen her, you weaken yourself. The parasite is never satisfied. No amount of giving, loving, or rescuing can fill her. That's because her hunger is not for healing, but for power, the power of keeping you tethered by need. Her true addiction isn't to support, it's to being supported. And so you become the endless source of energy for a void that never closes. If you're beginning to see yourself in these dynamics, take a step back. Recognizing the pattern is the first act of liberation. Covert psychological abuse operates in shadows. It thrives on confusion, on your inability to name what's happening. By seeing it clearly, you reclaim the first piece of power that's been taken from you. But the manipulation doesn't stop with parasitism. Another archetype of psychological destruction is the mask controller. This woman builds her power through duality, one face for the world, another for you. To friends, family, and colleagues, she is graceful, kind, endlessly generous. To you, behind closed doors, she is critical, manipulative, controlling, and cold. This split reality is devastating because it destabilizes your own sense of truth. Everyone else sees her as a saint. So when you speak of her cruelty, you sound ungrateful, paranoid, or even delusional. She weaponizes her public image against you. How could you say that about her? Your friends ask. She's amazing. But you know the truth, the person they admire is not the person you live with. This mask isolates you. Because no one else witnesses the private cruelty, you carry it alone. Worse, she uses her public perfection to manipulate you further. You're expected to play along with the charade, to smile in photos, to maintain the illusion of happiness. Any attempt to reveal the truth risks turning you into the villain. And so, her mask becomes your cage. Yet another archetype is the chaos generator. Unlike the mask controller, she doesn't hide her instability, she externalizes it. Her internal chaos must always find expression, and so peace becomes impossible. Calm suffocates her. Stability terrifies her. So she creates drama, invents emergencies, and manufactures crises. The chaos generator lives in permanent turbulence. A forgotten text becomes a betrayal. A small disagreement becomes a war. A peaceful evening becomes a storm of accusations, tears, or sudden confessions designed to destabilize you. This perpetual state of emergency drains your energy, keeping you locked in survival mode. You can never relax, never recover, never breathe. And here lies the most destructive truth. None of these women appear dangerous when you first meet them. They appear sensitive, fragile, intelligent, empathetic, or charismatic. They wear the mask of care while sowing the seeds of destruction. They don't conquer with fists, they conquer with your own instincts, your own empathy, your own desire to protect. The real battle is not with them, it's with your own blindness. Once you learn to see these patterns, once you stop mistaking manipulation for intimacy and chaos for passion, you begin to break free. But until then, you remain a prisoner not to her power, but to your own willingness to give it away. This pattern serves multiple psychological functions for her, each designed to keep you entangled in a dynamic that benefits her at the expense of your clarity and well-being. First, the constant creation of chaos keeps you too busy managing immediate problems to step back and recognize the larger, repeating pattern. When your energy is consumed by emergencies, you have no bandwidth left to analyze her behavior with perspective. Second, the endless crises position her as someone who perpetually requires your help, validation, and resources, binding you more deeply into the role of rescuer. Third, the volatility creates intensity that she mistakes for intimacy. In her mind, the heat of conflict, emotional outbursts, and constant drama become proof of passion, even as true emotional closeness remains absent. The chaos also functions as a powerful defense mechanism. By keeping the relationship in a perpetual crisis mode, she avoids the vulnerability required for authentic intimacy. If everything is always on fire, there is never space for calm, vulnerable conversations or quiet emotional connection. Drama becomes her substitute for depth. Intensity replaces authenticity. And while it may feel like you are deeply bonded through the constant turbulence, in reality, you are trapped in a cycle that prevents real intimacy from ever taking root. Living with a chaos generator is psychologically exhausting. Your nervous system becomes trapped in survival mode because there is always another disaster to solve, another fire to put out, another mess to clean up. This state of constant activation eventually leads to chronic stress, anxiety, and even burnout. Instead of building a partnership that nurtures your energy, you live in a state of emotional hypervigilance, waiting for the next explosion. The boundary violator operates differently, but with equal destructiveness. She systematically tests, pushes, and eventually breaks your personal boundaries, all while making you feel guilty for even having them. Her operating principle is simple. True love means unlimited access to every part of your life, your time, your energy, your emotions, your space, even your privacy. At first, boundary violations start small, almost trivial. She might casually check your phone, drop by without notice, or make plans for both of you without asking. When confronted, she reframes these intrusions as signs of devotion. I only looked at your phone because I love you. I only showed up because I missed you. Each act is cloaked in the language of intimacy, making it harder for you to challenge it without appearing cold or unloving. As her violations escalate, so do the manipulations. When you attempt to assert your need for personal space or independence, she flips the script. Suddenly, your boundaries are framed as evidence of rejection, lack of trust, or emotional distance. Wanting privacy becomes proof you're hiding something. Wanting alone time becomes evidence that you don't care. Gradually, your resistance weakens as she convinces you that your needs are selfish. Over time, your life bends completely around her preferences, while your individuality erodes in the process. The gaslighter is perhaps the most insidious manipulator of all. Her strategy is not overt control or visible chaos, but the slow erosion of your confidence in your own mind. She systematically undermines your perception of reality by denying events that happened, rewriting history, and making you question your memory and judgment. Gaslighting is not about a single lie, it's about sustained distortion. When you remember something hurtful she said, she insists she never said it. When you recall a harmful action, she claims it happened differently. When you notice patterns in her behavior, she dismisses you as paranoid or overly sensitive. Over time, the cumulative effect is devastating. You begin to second-guess yourself constantly. You stop trusting your own instincts. And eventually, you become reliant on her version of events because yours feels unreliable. To reinforce her control, the gaslighter often frames herself as the calm, rational one. She positions her distortions as helping you see reality more clearly. This inversion makes you grateful for her supposed patience with your faulty perceptions, further deepening the psychological trap. The emotional terrorist uses fear rather than distortion as her primary weapon. She takes your love and emotional investment and turns them into leverage, holding the relationship hostage to ensure your compliance. Her threats may not always be explicit, but the message is always the same: comply or face emotional destruction. She may threaten to leave if you don't bend to her will, threaten self-harm if you set boundaries, or threaten to smear your reputation if you resist her control. Even subtler tactics withdrawn affection, cold silences, dramatic breakdowns achieve the same purpose. Over time, you learn that asserting your needs equals relational chaos, while compliance brings temporary peace. This dynamic makes you responsible for her well-being in an impossible way. Suddenly, you carry the weight of her emotional stability, mental health, and happiness. Any action that displeases her becomes an attack on her very survival. You live in a constant state of emotional hostage-taking, giving up your needs to preserve hers, while receiving no real stability in return. Finally, the identity thief works not through drama, chaos, or threats, but through the gradual dismantling of your authentic self. She does not seek partnership with the person you are. She seeks to mold you into someone who fits her psychological needs and insecurities. This theft begins subtly. She discourages activities or friendships she finds threatening, criticizes hobbies she doesn't value, or guilt trips you for spending time on things that don't revolve around her. At first, these seem like minor adjustments, but each discouragement chips away at your individuality. Through selective reinforcement, she shapes your personality into a reflection of her preferences. She praises behaviors that serve her while punishing or withdrawing affection from those that don't. Over time, you unconsciously reshape yourself into the version she prefers, abandoning interests, relationships, and even values that once defined you. What makes this tactic particularly destructive is its subtlety. You may not even notice your identity slipping away until one day you realize you no longer recognize yourself in the mirror. Together, these patterns: chaos generation, boundary violation, gaslighting, emotional terrorism, and identity theft form a devastating web of psychological manipulation. Each operates differently, but all share a common purpose: to control, consume, and reshape your psychological energy until nothing remains but compliance. The greatest danger lies in their invisibility. Because each tactic is disguised as love, care, or passion, you may not recognize it as abuse until you are deeply entangled. The chaos feels like intensity. The control feels like devotion. The manipulation feels like guidance. And the theft of identity feels like love molding you into a better person. But beneath the surface, the truth is clear. These dynamics are not partnership. They are predation. She rewards behaviors that serve her needs while punishing authentic expressions that make her uncomfortable. Over time, this system of reward and punishment conditions you like an experiment in operant psychology. Praise, affection, or even the simple removal of conflict become rewards when they reinforce compliance. Coldness, criticism, withdrawal, or sudden rage become punishments whenever you step outside the role she has scripted for you. What makes this process insidious is not its brutality, but its subtlety. The modifications to your behavior feel like reasonable compromises, the type of adjustments people make in relationships all the time. But in truth, each adjustment is a small surrender of authenticity. Gradually, you learn to silence your true self. You withhold opinions that you know will trigger her displeasure. You filter your emotional responses, presenting only those feelings that you know she will tolerate. You abandon interests or friendships that provoke her jealousy or insecurity. And because this erosion happens incrementally, you do not notice the cumulative cost until much of your individuality has already been sacrificed. It doesn't feel like losing yourself, it feels like making the relationship work. The identity thief is particularly dangerous because she reframes her controlling influence as benevolent guidance. She insists that her criticisms are merely attempts to help you become a better version of yourself. She tells you that she sees potential in you that you cannot see in yourself, but her definition of potential is nothing more than compliance with her preferences. What looks like encouragement is often covert domination disguised as love. In this way, you are tricked into believing you are growing, when in reality, you are shrinking into the narrow container of her psychological needs. The recovery prevention agent. If the identity thief steals your selfhood, the recovery prevention agent ensures you never retrieve it. Her entire power dynamic depends on you remaining wounded, dependent, and uncertain. Any attempt at healing threatens to dismantle the imbalance she relies on. If you become healthier, more confident, and more autonomous, you no longer fit the role she has cast you in. Thus, she unconsciously, sometimes consciously sabotages your growth. This sabotage rarely comes as outright prohibition. She won't always say, "Don't go to therapy." Instead, she undermines it subtly. "Why waste money talking to a stranger when you can talk to me?" Or therapists just put ideas in your head that ruin relationships. She may not tell you to stop reading self-improvement books, but she will dismiss them as boring or unnecessary. She may not forbid you from exercising, meditating, or joining support groups, but she will suddenly need urgent help, manufacture crises, or withhold affection whenever you prioritize those activities. The cruelest tactic of the recovery prevention agent is her ability to trigger old wounds exactly when you begin to heal them. If you've been working on overcoming anger, she provokes you until you explode. If you've been practicing detachment, she creates drama until you're pulled back in. If you've been learning self-worth, she devalues you at the precise moment you feel confident. This is not accidental. She instinctively presses the buttons that return you to the version of yourself she knows how to control. Worse still, she reframes her sabotage as protection of the relationship. She convinces you that your healing is a threat to what you have together. You are told that boundaries are coldness, therapy is brainwashing, and personal growth is abandonment. You begin to feel guilty for improving yourself, as if striving for health is an act of betrayal. This inversion of values keeps you locked in dysfunction, believing loyalty requires stagnation. Early warning signs. Most men overlook these patterns in the early stages. They expect toxic women to reveal themselves with obvious drama, blatant aggression, or open hostility. But the most dangerous personalities operate with subtlety. Their influence seeps in gradually, making the abnormal appear normal. The first warning sign is the speed of intimacy acceleration. Healthy intimacy unfolds naturally, but toxic partners push for rapid bonding. Within weeks, she wants exclusivity, confessions of love, or major commitments. This urgency is not passionate, is colonization. She secures your emotional investment before you have time to evaluate her true character. The second warning sign is isolation through subtle criticism. Instead of forbidding your friendships, she raises eyebrows, makes dismissive comments, or becomes mysteriously upset whenever you spend time elsewhere. Slowly, maintaining your outside connections becomes emotionally expensive. You choose isolation not because she commands it, but because avoiding her passive aggression feels easier. The third warning sign is reality negotiation. Early on, it doesn't look like gaslighting, it looks like just another perspective. She suggests alternative versions of events that make her appear more innocent, while gently sowing doubt in your own perceptions. Over time, these small distortions accumulate until you no longer trust your own memory without her validation. Finally, pay attention to emotional disproportionality. When her emotional reactions don't fit the situation, rage over trivial slights, cold indifference to major betrayals, are glimpsing her internal instability. Eventually, her inner chaos becomes the constant environment of your relationship. Psychological infection, the mechanism through which toxicity spreads, is emotional contagion. Human beings unconsciously mirror the emotions of those closest to them. At first, this feels like connection. You match her moods, synchronize your energy, and adopt her worldview as an act of intimacy. But what begins as empathy gradually becomes colonization. You internalize her emotional vocabulary, her ways of interpreting events, and her judgments of others. Her worldview becomes your own default framework. At the final stage, you can no longer separate your authentic perspective from the one she has implanted. You think you are growing closer. In reality, you are losing distinction. The danger lies in how deceptively positive this process feels. You mistake dependency for intimacy, control for love, and psychological absorption for union. What looks like deep connection is actually psychological erasure. Trauma bonding. The ultimate trap is the trauma bond. These bonds form when cycles of stress and relief become addictive. She generates crises that spike your anxiety, then offers comfort that soothes it. Instead of questioning why she created the problem, you become grateful for the relief. This cycle mirrors the mechanics of gambling addiction. Intermittent reinforcement. Affection, approval, and intimacy are distributed unpredictably. You never know when the reward will arrive, so you keep working harder to earn it. The uncertainty itself becomes addictive. The bond deepens through manufactured intensity. She engineers extreme highs and lows, making you feel as though you've shared profound experiences. You confuse adrenaline for love, drama for passion, and volatility for depth. The more chaotic the bond becomes, the more convinced you are that it must be special. The trap completes when you equate the trauma bond with true love. You tell yourself that the difficulty proves the depth, when in reality, the difficulty proves only the presence of manipulation. In the end, the identity thief, recovery prevention agent, and trauma bond engineer operate not as different people, but as different psychological strategies within the same personality. Their goal is not partnership, but dominance. Their method is not love, but psychological dependency. And their victory is not mutual happiness, but your slow erasure. True recovery begins the moment you recognize that what felt like love was in fact captivity disguised as connection. Only then can you reclaim your authenticity, rebuild your boundaries, and free yourself from the invisible chains of collective psychological manipulation. The intensity of your emotional attachment, the difficulty of imagining life without her, and the fear of losing the connection all feel like evidence of deep love rather than symptoms of psychological addiction. Breaking trauma bonds requires recognizing that intensity is not intimacy, that emotional addiction is not love, and that fear of loss is not evidence of value. Real love creates security and growth, not anxiety and dependence. Dangerous women often use social proof as a weapon to validate their behavior and invalidate your concerns. They surround themselves with people who support their narrative while isolating you from anyone who might offer alternative perspectives on the relationship dynamic. Social proof weaponization begins with carefully curated friend groups that share her worldview and support her victim narratives. These allies provide constant validation for her perspective while treating your concerns as evidence of your deficiencies rather than legitimate relationship issues. She also uses social media strategically to create public narratives about your relationship that don't match your private experience. The perfect couple photos, the loving posts about your partnership, and the public displays of affection create social pressure to maintain the illusion rather than address the reality. The weapon becomes particularly powerful when she recruits your own friends and family to her perspective through careful impression management and strategic sharing of information. She presents herself as the reasonable, caring partner, while subtly portraying you as difficult, unreasonable, or emotionally unstable. This social proof manipulation makes it nearly impossible to get objective feedback about the relationship because everyone in your social circle has been influenced by her carefully constructed narrative. Your reality becomes increasingly isolated, while her version gains social validation. Many psychologically dangerous women create financial dependencies and entanglements that make leaving the relationship economically costly, adding practical barriers to the psychological barriers they've already established. Financial entanglement often begins with seemingly innocent shared expenses, joint accounts, or financial interdependence that appears to be normal relationship progression. However, these arrangements gradually shift in ways that increase your financial obligations while reducing your financial independence. She might encourage you to take on shared debts for her benefits, co-sign for obligations that primarily serve her interests, or make financial decisions that increase your responsibility for her well-being. Each financial entanglement makes leaving more complicated and expensive. The strategy also involves creating lifestyle inflation that requires your income to maintain. She encourages spending patterns, living arrangements, or financial commitments that stretch your resources while making her comfortable, creating financial pressure that keeps you trapped even when the relationship becomes unbearable. Financial manipulation can also involve sabotaging your career advancement, discouraging income, increasing opportunities, or creating crises that interfere with your professional development. This ensures your continued financial dependence while limiting your options for economic independence. When you begin recognizing the psychological damage and attempting to heal from toxic relationship patterns, dangerous women often escalate their manipulation tactics to prevent your recovery and maintain psychological control. Recovery sabotage begins with minimizing your concerns and reframing your healing attempts as attacks on the relationship. Your desire for therapy becomes selfishness. Your need for space becomes abandonment. And your attempts at boundary setting become evidence of your unwillingness to work on the relationship. The sabotage escalates through crisis manufacturing designed to interrupt your healing activities. She creates emergencies that require your immediate attention whenever you're scheduled for therapy, self-care activities, or time with supportive friends who might encourage your continued growth. She also uses your own healing language against you, adopting therapy terminology to pathise your behavior while avoiding accountability for her own. Your attempts to communicate healthily become evidence of your emotional manipulation, while her manipulation becomes reframed as justified responses to your behavior. The most sophisticated sabotage involves appearing to support your healing while subtly undermining it. She might encourage therapy while selecting therapists who align with her perspective, support your boundaries while violating them consistently, or claim to want change while sabotaging every attempt at genuine BAS. Relationship improvement. The fundamental truth about psychologically dangerous women is that they operate below the radar of conscious awareness, using your own positive qualities against you. Your desire to help becomes the mechanism for your own psychological destruction. Your capacity for love becomes the weakness they exploit. These women aren't necessarily evil or deliberately malicious. They're psychologically unconscious, operating from unhealed wounds and unintegrated shadows that seek external targets for internal problems. They genuinely don't understand the damage they cause because they lack the self-awareness to recognize their own psychological patterns. The danger lies in their unconsciousness combined with your consciousness. Your awareness and empathy make you vulnerable to their projections and manipulations. Your desire to understand and help makes you an ideal host for their psychological parasitism. Protection requires developing the ability to recognize these patterns quickly and respond appropriately. This means trusting your emotional responses when relationships feel draining, chaotic, or confusing. It means maintaining boundaries even when boundary setting is presented as unloving. Most importantly, protection requires understanding that you cannot heal someone who doesn't want to be healed. You cannot love someone into psychological health. You cannot sacrifice yourself to save someone who is determined to remain unconscious. The women worth investing in are those who take responsibility for their own psychological health, who do their own emotional work, and who bring consciousness rather than chaos to relationships. They enhance your life rather than consuming it, support your growth rather than sabotaging it, and contribute to the relationship rather than just taking from it. Healthy women don't require you to lose yourself to love them. They don't need you to become psychologically smaller so they can feel bigger. They don't drain your energy to fuel their dysfunction or use your empathy as a weapon against your well-being. The path to protection involves developing discernment between genuine vulnerability and manipulative victimhood, between authentic emotional needs and parasitic emotional demands, between real intimacy and psychological invasion. It requires trusting your instincts, even when those instincts contradict someone's carefully constructed image. If this analysis of covert psychological manipulation has helped you recognize dangerous patterns in your own relationships, subscribe to this channel for more insights into protecting your mental health from people who present as helpers while actually being HEMERs. Hit that notification bell because understanding these dynamics could save you years of psychological damage disguised as love. Share this video with any man who needs to understand that the most dangerous women are often the ones who seem the most caring, because true care builds you up rather than breaking you down from the inside out.